Welcome to the deep dive. Looks like someone's been doing some research, huh? You sent us a ton of articles and studies about mental illness.
Wow, yeah, that's quite a stack.
It is. It's a lot to get through. But luckily, that's why we have expert speaker here with us
Happy to be here.
to help us make sense of it all and pull out the most interesting stuff. So, what sparked your interest in this topic? Was there anything specific that got you thinking about mental illness in a new way?
Honestly, I've always been fascinated by the brain
Yeah.
and how it works. But I started to question, the traditional explanations for mental illness.
Okay.
The idea that it's all just about chemical imbalances or, like you said, difficult life experiences. It never quite sat right with me.
Yeah.
And then I stumbled across some research on this new theory that's emerging
Okay.
about the role of brain energy in mental health.
Okay.
And it blew my mind.
It's really interesting stuff, and it seems like that's what really caught your attention, too, from what you sent us. It looks like you're super intrigued by this idea that mental illness might not just be about chemical imbalances or, those tough life experiences, but could be linked to something even more fundamental, the way our brains actually use energy.
Exactly. That's a really great way to put it.
So, expert speaker, would you say that's a fair summary of what we're diving into today?
Absolutely. You've hit on a growing area of research that's challenging the traditional ways we think about mental illness.
Okay.
For decades, we focused on things like genetics,
Right.
neurotransmitters, trauma.
Mm-hmm.
But this new research is suggesting that maybe, just maybe,
Yeah.
we've been overlooking a crucial piece of the puzzle,
Yeah.
how our brain cells produce and use energy.
I like the missing piece of the puzzle. Okay.
Yeah.
So one of the things that you sent us that I thought was super interesting was this YouTube video featuring Dr. Chris Palmer from Harvard.
Oh, yeah. He's doing some really groundbreaking work.
Yeah. He is, and I was blown away by this argument he makes that mental illness, maybe it's not a bunch of separate, isolated conditions,
Right.
but it could actually be a spectrum.
A spectrum.
Yeah. And he even compares it to how we think about pain.
That's such a brilliant analogy.
It is. Because, pain can be caused by so many different things.
Yeah.
But it's all ultimately processed in the brain.
Right.
So is he basically saying the same thing could be true for mental illness?
That's exactly what he's suggesting.
Okay.
That even though we give all these different mental illnesses, these distinct names and categories.
Like anxiety, depression,
Yeah.
bipolar disorder, schizophrenia.
Exactly. They may actually share a lot of the same underlying mechanism
Okay, yeah.
and risk factors.
So it's more about like different points on a spectrum rather than completely separate things.
Precisely. And that's a really radical shift in perspective.
It is. And, I was thinking about this, and it makes sense in a way because, you can have physical health problems that contribute to mental health problems.
Absolutely.
And vice versa.
Right.
So why wouldn't there be this underlying connection?
Exactly. It's all interconnected.
Okay, so this is where it gets even more interesting. This root cause, the missing piece of the puzzle, could be mitochondria.
You got it.
Those tiny powerhouses inside our cells.
Those little guys.
Yeah, I vaguely remember learning about them in high school biology, but I never would have guessed that they were somehow connected to mental health.
It's pretty mind-blowing, right?
It is.
But it turns out that mitochondria are way more complex than we used to think.
Okay.
They're not just these simple energy factories.
Right.
They're deeply involved in a whole bunch of processes that are crucial for brain function.
Like what?
Well, for starters, they're responsible for producing ATP, which is the main energy currency of our cells.
Okay.
But they're also involved in things like regulating calcium levels,
Okay.
producing neurotransmitters,
Interesting.
controlling inflammation,
Wow.
even cell death.
So they're like these little multitaskers working behind the scenes to keep everything running smoothly.
Exactly. They're like the unsung heroes of our cells.
Okay.
And when they're not functioning properly, it can have a ripple effect throughout the whole body,
Including the brain.
especially the brain, because the brain is so metabolically active.
It uses a lot of energy.
It's the most energy-demanding organ in the body.
Wow.
So it's incredibly sensitive to any disruptions in energy production.
Okay.
And that's where the link to mental illness comes in.
So hold on. If this idea is so groundbreaking, if it makes so much sense, why haven't we heard about it before?
That's a great question.
And what about all that research that blames mental illness on genetics or trauma? Are we just throwing all that research out the window?
Not at all. The brain energy theory doesn't dismiss genetics or trauma.
Okay.
Those factors definitely play a role. It's more about putting all the pieces of the puzzle together in a new way.
So it's not an either situation.
Right.
It's more about how all these different factors can interact to influence our mental health.
Exactly. It's a more holistic way of looking at mental illness,
Okay.
recognizing that it's not just about what's happening in the brain.
But also about what's happening in the body as a whole.
Precisely.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Welcome back to our deep dive into brain energy and mental illness. In the last part, we started to explore how glitches in the way our brain cells produce and use energy could actually be at the root of conditions like depression or anxiety.
It really makes you question that traditional view that mental illness is all about chemical imbalances or just comes from tough life experiences, doesn't it?
It really does. And we
Yeah.
spent a lot of time talking about Dr. Palmer's work and the ketogenic diet.
Right. And those are great examples of how this new perspective is really challenging the status quo.
Totally. But you also send us research on other things that affect the brain's energies, things like insulin resistance and inflammation. You even sent us stuff about the gut microbiome.
Yeah. The research you shared definitely goes way beyond just the keto diet. It paints a much broader picture of how metabolic dysfunction in general can impact our mental health. It's a really exciting field.
Okay, so let's dive into some of these other metabolic factors, starting with insulin resistance. One of the articles you sent talked about a link between insulin resistance and psychosis.
Right.
Honestly, I was pretty shocked by that. It's hard to believe that something like insulin, which I usually associate with blood sugar, could have such a big impact on the brain.
I know what you mean. But insulin is actually crucial for a lot of brain functions.
Okay.
It helps regulate neurotransmitters, and it even plays a role in how our brains form new connections.
So if insulin signaling gets messed up, it can actually cause problems throughout the brain.
Exactly. And the research you sent mentioned a study that followed over 5,000 children for almost 25 years, from babies to young adults.
Wow. That's a long time. So did they find a connection between insulin and mental health?
They did. The children who had the highest levels of insulin resistance when they were young were way more likely to develop psychosis later on, and their risk of being diagnosed with conditions like bipolar disorder or schizophrenia also went up dramatically.
The article mentioned a 500% increased risk of psychosis. That's huge. Makes you think about how important metabolic health is, even from a young age.
It really does. And it shows how mental health isn't just something that suddenly appears in adulthood. The stage might be set much earlier, and these metabolic factors could be a key part of that.
That's a little scary, but it's also good to know. Okay, so we've got insulin resistance, but you also sent research about the role of inflammation in mental health.
Right.
I've always associated inflammation with physical things, like a sprained ankle or an infection. I never realized it could affect our mental health, too.
It's a connection that surprises a lot of people. But the truth is, inflammation is a complex process that can affect almost every part of our body, including our brain. When inflammation becomes chronic, it can really wreak havoc on brain cells and disrupt normal brain function.
So how does inflammation somewhere else in the body end up affecting the brain? It seems like a big leap.
There are a couple of ways inflammation can reach the brain. One way is through the bloodstream. Inflammatory molecules created in other parts of the body can actually cross the blood-brain barrier and directly impact brain cells.
So it's like a leak of harmful substances from the body into the brain.
That's one way to think about it. But inflammation can also start within the brain itself. Our brains have their own immune cells called microglia, and when they're constantly activated, they can release inflammatory molecules that damage nearby neurons.
So it's not just inflammation coming from outside the brain. There can be internal sources of inflammation in the brain as well.
That's right. And either way, this chronic inflammation can have a huge impact on brain function. It can contribute to symptoms like depression, anxiety, fatigue, and brain fog, and it can even lead to cognitive decline.
It's kind of alarming to think that something like inflammation, which we often can't even see, could be affecting our mental health.
It definitely highlights how important it is to consider the whole body when it comes to mental health, not just the brain in isolation.
Yeah.
We have to think about how the immune system, metabolism, and brain are all working together.
Speaking of the whole body, that brings us to the gut microbiome. I'm still trying to wrap my head around how trillions of bacteria living in our gut could actually influence our mental state. What did you think of the research you saw on this?
It is pretty mind-blowing. The connection between the gut and the brain is one of the most rapidly evolving areas of research right now, and we're just beginning to understand how interconnected the two really are. The trillions of bacteria in our gut, which we call the gut microbiome, are crucial for so many things, from digestion to immune function.
Right. I get that the gut microbiome plays a role in digestion and immunity, but how does it affect our mental state?
Well, one of the key discoveries is that these gut bacteria actually produce neurotransmitters like serotonin, dopamine, and GABA.
Wait a minute, the gut bacteria are making neurotransmitters. I thought that was the brain's job.
The brain is definitely the main producer, but our gut bacteria make a surprising amount of these neurotransmitters. And these are the same neurotransmitters involved in regulating our mood, motivation, and stress response.
So if our gut bacteria are out of balance, could that actually mess with our neurotransmitter levels and contribute to mental health problems?
That's exactly what the research is starting to suggest. Studies have shown that imbalances in the gut microbiome, which is often called dysbiosis, are linked to a higher risk of conditions like depression, anxiety, and even autism spectrum disorder.
It's like our gut bacteria are having a secret conversation with our brains, influencing our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors.
It really is a fascinating interplay, and it just emphasizes how important it is to take a holistic approach to mental health care, considering the gut, the brain, and the immune system all together.
It's almost like we're looking at a whole new map of the human body, one that recognizes how important these interconnected systems are for our mental well-being.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this deeper understanding is opening up new possibilities for treating mental illness possibilities that go beyond the traditional approaches of just medication and therapy.
And this brings us right back to the idea of metabolic interventions. If things like insulin resistance, inflammation, and gut dysbiosis are all playing a role in mental illness, could focusing on them actually help people get better?
That's the big question.
Yeah.
And the research you sent definitely points in that direction. There's more and more evidence that interventions like dietary changes, exercise, stress management, and even targeted nutritional therapies can actually improve metabolic health and, in turn, improve mental well-being.
So it's not just about taking a pill. It's about making fundamental changes to our lifestyle and how we take care of our bodies.
That's right. And that shift from treating symptoms to addressing the underlying root causes is really at the heart of the brain energy theory and this new field of metabolic psychiatry.
I like the sound of that. It's about taking control of our health.
Welcome back. It's amazing how much we've uncovered already just by kind of shifting our perspective on mental illness and thinking about, the role of the body, metabolism, all that stuff.
It really is. It's like we've been looking at mental health through a really narrow lens for so long, and now we're finally starting to zoom out and see the whole picture.
Yeah, exactly. It's like we zoomed out and we saw the whole landscape instead of just one tree. But now, for the million-dollar question, what can we actually do about it?
Right. That's the key. Right.
We know these metabolic factors play a role in mental health, but what are the actual tools we can use to, improve things?
Well, the good news is that you sent in a ton of research about potential interventions from diet and exercise to some pretty cutting-edge therapies and technologies. Perfect. So let's start with nutrition, since that's what got me interested in this whole brain energy idea in the first place.
Makes sense.
We've talked about the ketogenic diet, but I'm curious, are there other things, like ways we can eat that can support our brain's energy needs?
Absolutely. The keto diet is just one approach, and it's not necessarily the best fit for everyone. Luckily, there are a bunch of other dietary strategies that can be really helpful for boosting brain energy.
Okay, like what? Give me some examples. I'm ready.
Well, there's intermittent fasting, which has been shown to have some pretty amazing effects on brain health.
Yeah.
It basically involves cycling between periods of eating and fasting, which gives your body a break from constantly having to, digest food.
So it's not necessarily about what you eat, but when you eat.
Exactly. And it's not as complicated as it sounds.
Okay, good.
There's also time-restricted feeding,
Okay.
which is similar to intermittent fasting, but it focuses more on limiting your eating window to a specific time period each day. You might only eat between the hours of 10 a.m. and 6 p.m.
I've heard of that. People talk about it for weight loss, but I didn't realize it could also impact brain health.
Yeah. It's pretty cool. The research on that is really promising, too. It seems like giving our bodies these regular breaks from digestion allows our cells to really focus on other stuff, like repair and maintenance, which are super important for our brain to function properly.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so we've got the when we eat, but are there any specific foods or types of diets we should be thinking about focusing on?
Yeah, for sure. The Mediterranean diet's a great one. It's packed with fruits and vegetables, whole grains, healthy fats, and lean protein. All things that are, super beneficial for your brain.
Yeah, it sounds pretty delicious too. Plus, it's not as restrictive as some other diets I've tried in the past.
Right. That's one of the great things about it. It's more about making sustainable changes,
All
not
right.
just following, really strict rules that you can't stick to.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It's about finding what works best for you and your own needs and what you like.
Exactly. And,
Yeah.
it's always a good idea to work with a healthcare professional
Yeah.
or a registered dietitian who can help you figure out what's best for you.
Yeah, that's good advice. Now let's move on to exercise.
Okay.
I know it's good for my body, but can it actually impact brain energy and mental health?
Oh, absolutely. Exercise is one of the most powerful things you can do for both your physical and mental well-being. It's like a magic bullet for your brain.
Okay, tell me more. What does it actually do to our brains?
Well, it increases something called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF,
Okay.
which is basically like fertilizer for your brain.
I like the sound of brain fertilizer. Okay, what else? What else does it do?
It also increases blood flow to the brain,
Okay.
which helps get all those essential nutrients and oxygen up there. It reduces inflammation throughout the body, and guess what? It even helps your body create new mitochondria.
So it's hitting all the right spots when it comes to brain health.
It is. It's pretty amazing what exercise can do.
But what about those of us who really struggle with motivation or just energy levels in general? Because it can be hard to get moving when you're already feeling depleted.
I totally get that.
Yeah.
In those cases, it's all about starting small and gradually building up your activity level.
Mm-hmm.
Even a short walk or, some gentle stretching can make a difference.
Okay, so I don't have to run a marathon tomorrow.
Nope. You don't have to go from 0 to 60.
Okay, good. Good to know.
And as you start to, feel the benefits, your motivation and energy levels will naturally increase, which makes it, easier to incorporate more movement into your routine.
It's like a positive feedback loop.
Exactly.
You get a little boost from moving, and then that makes you want to move more.
Exactly. And the key is to find something that you actually enjoy doing, whether it's dancing, hiking, swimming, playing a sport, whatever it is, just make it fun.
Makes sense. Okay, so we've covered nutrition and exercise. What other lifestyle things can we do that might impact brain energy?
One of the most important is sleep. It's absolutely essential for giving our brains a chance to recharge and, repair themselves.
Oh, yeah. I definitely feel a lot sharper after a good night's sleep, but how does it actually affect our brain's energy?
Well, when we're sleeping, our brains are super busy cleaning up waste products, repairing damaged cells, consolidating memories. It's like a nightly detox.
So it's not just about resting our bodies, it's about giving our brains a chance to really catch up.
Exactly. And when we don't get enough sleep, those essential processes get disrupted, which leads to brain fog, fatigue, mood swings, problems thinking clearly, all that stuff.
Yeah, I've definitely experienced all of that. And I know that chronic sleep deprivation can make people more vulnerable to, things like depression and anxiety.
It absolutely can. So prioritizing sleep is really important. Aim for 7 to 9 hours of quality sleep each night and try to establish a consistent sleep routine.
I'll try. It's easier said than done sometimes, but yeah, definitely worth striving for.
What about stress management? Okay.
Because I know, stress is just a part of life, but can it actually drain our brain's energy?
Chronic stress is really tough on our brains because it triggers this release of cortisol, which is the hormone that helps us deal with, threats in the short term.
Right.
But when those cortisol levels stay high for too long, it can actually damage brain cells. And it can make it harder to think clearly.
So it's kind of
So,
a double-edged sword. A little stress can be, motivating, but too much is definitely not good.
Exactly. And that's why finding healthy ways to manage stress is crucial. Things like mindfulness, meditation, deep breathing exercises, yoga, spending time in nature, all those things can make a big difference.
And don't forget social connection. Having a supportive network of friends and family, engaging in activities that bring you joy, all those things can help, buffer the negative effects of stress.
They absolutely can. So now, alongside these lifestyle modifications, there are some really exciting advancements happening in the field of metabolic psychiatry, opening up new treatment possibilities.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier that some psychiatric medications can actually have negative effects on our metabolism.
Right.
So are there any alternative medications or therapies out there that might be more metabolically friendly?
There are. Researchers are looking into repurposing existing medications that we know have metabolic benefits. For example, Metformin,
Mhm.
which is a drug that's commonly used to treat type 2 diabetes, is actually being studied for its potential as an antidepressant and antipsychotic.
So it's kind of like taking a medication that's already proven to be safe and effective for one condition and seeing if it could also help with mental health issues.
Exactly. Kind of killing two birds with one stone.
Makes sense. And are there any new medications being developed that actually specifically target the metabolic pathways involved in mental illness?
There are. And that's really exciting. There's a lot of research happening right now, and it's definitely an area to keep an eye on.
Okay, that's really hopeful. What about therapies that aren't medication-based? Are there any of those that seem promising?
Definitely. There's a lot of interest in therapies that directly target the gut microbiome,
Okay.
like fecal microbiota transplantation, or FMT.
Okay, that one sounds a little intense.
Yeah.
Can you break down exactly what FMT is?
It involves transplanting fecal matter from a healthy donor to someone who has, an imbalance in their gut bacteria. It's still early days for using FMT for mental health, but the research is showing some pretty incredible results.
Wow, okay. Well, I'll take your word for it. So are there any other less intense ways to influence the gut microbiome?
Of course, things like prebiotics and probiotics can actually help to, modulate the gut microbiome and promote a healthy balance of bacteria.
So we can take supplements or eat fermented foods to help our gut.
Exactly. And then there are therapies like transcranial magnetic stimulation, or TMS,
Okay.
and neurofeedback, which work by directly stimulating or training the brain.
I've heard of those. How do those work? Can you explain it a little?
Yeah, so TMS uses magnetic pulses to stimulate specific regions of the brain, while neurofeedback actually teaches people to regulate their own brainwave activity. It's kind of like giving your brain a workout.
I like that analogy. So there are lots of tools and interventions out there that can potentially improve brain energy and, mental health.
Tons. And what's exciting is that we're only just scratching the surface. I think there's a lot more to come.
So the most effective approach is probably a personalized one that kind of combines, all these different things, lifestyle modifications, nutritional therapies, and maybe some other interventions based on your specific needs.
Exactly. It's all about taking a holistic view of your health and addressing the underlying causes rather than just masking the symptoms.
It's about figuring out what works for you.
Yeah, exactly. And remember, this is a journey, not a destination. There's always more to learn, and new discoveries are being made all the time.
That's a good point. So stay curious, keep exploring, and don't be afraid to advocate for your own health, right? You have the power to take control of your mental well-being and really create a life that feels good in both your mind and your body.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
We hope this deep dive has given you some new insights and inspired you to, keep learning about this amazing connection between your brain, your body, and your mental health.
And if you're struggling out there, please know you're not alone. There are resources available, and there's definitely hope.
Yeah, that's so important to remember. The field of metabolic psychiatry is evolving so rapidly, which is giving us new and better ways to understand and treat mental illness.
And as we continue to, unravel the mysteries of that brain-body connection, we're moving towards a future where mental health care is more personalized, proactive, and empowering.
I love that.
Me too. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive, and keep exploring.